It was a week ago. I was out at sunrise and I shot this image, which actually has come out pretty well. But it's not a single image, it's actually 4 images. I focus stacked. I did a time blend. I merged long and short exposures. And then I went on to remove some people and some other bits and pieces from the scene that I didn't like, and then corrected some wide angle issues in the background. And in this video I'm going to show you exactly how I did all of that, starting in Lightroom and finishing up in Photoshop, actually finishing up in Lightroom again. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do and you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe before you go. Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. So it was a week ago, it was 2 videos ago, and I was out at my local coastline early in the morning doing a sunrise shoot. And this is the image that I produced from that. And in that video I talked about the composition choices and the composition compromises that I was having to make, but I also talked about my plans for the image in terms of shooting different versions of the image at different times and focusing in different places and at different exposure times, so that I could then merge all of those together in a way that I thought would be the most pleasing. And that's pretty much what I did. And in that video from last week, I did a quick kind of time lapse of the photo editing process. And I've had a few requests to actually show that in more detail and to talk through what I actually did, which is quite handy because I was kind of planning on doing that anyway. And that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. Now, if you haven't seen the video from last week, it's probably worth going back and watching that first to see the background behind this image and how I actually did the shots. I'll stick a link to that up there now. And if you're watching on a device that doesn't put up the little pop-up things here, I'll also stick a link to it in the video description as well. And now we'll crack on and have a look at how I actually processed the images. Okay, so there were a few steps that I did before I started doing any processing and editing. And the first thing I did is I went through and reviewed the images that I'd got, and I looked at where I'd got my focus stacking set up, so I knew which images and which part of which images were going to be for my foreground, what was going to be for my midground, what was going to be for my background and my sky. And I renamed the images, so I had a sky image, I had a midground image, I had a foreground image for the sides of the frame, which is where I'd focused right in close. And then I had a foreground image for the middle of the frame because that was a little bit further away, and it was also the image that I took after the sun had come up a bit higher and some light had started to fall on the rocks. So I'd got those 4 images already set up, renamed, and all I then had to do was go in and start the processing. So that's just some basic housekeeping that's worth doing on this kind of workflow where you've got multiple images to bring together. Anyway, let's go and have a look at what the actual edit looked like. Okay, so I started off with my sky image and I just played around with the basics tab, brought the exposure down a bit, put in a bit of contrast, brought the highlights down a bit, just brings a bit more detail back in the sky. Bring the shadows up. Yeah, a fair bit on the shadows, I think it was about there, I think. And then just do a little bit on the white points, and the black points just keeps it looking good. And then it's quite a colourful scene, so I think it can stand a reasonable amount of vibrance in there. And then, yeah, even a bit of saturation. With that bit done, what I was then going to do is apply exactly the same edits to all of the other images in there. So what I did was I selected all 4 images and then sync, check everything and synchronize. We've now got the same processing on all 4 images. like that. Now at this point what I did was I went and looked at each image a bit more carefully just to make sure that that edit worked for the various areas. I wasn't worried, for example, on the image that I had just for the foreground. Didn't really care what the sky looked like, but I needed to make sure that the foreground looked good. So with them all checked, I selected them all, did edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. Now it does take a little while for the images to open in Photoshop, so we'll jump into there in a second when it's finished. Okay, here's my 4 images open as layers: sky, midground, foreground sides and foreground center. And the first thing I've done is selected them all, and then I'm going to auto align the layers. Click on that and just give it a bit of time to do the auto align and make sure that everything lines up properly. It's really important to do that because even when you're shooting on a tripod and in theory nothing is moving, it's just possible, particularly when you're playing around with focus, that the composition changes just a fraction. If you're going to blend together, you need to make sure that everything in the image is lined up properly, and that's what this is doing. Okay, and now you can see on here, you can see there's been some tiny shifting in here. You can see these little blank areas around the outside where obviously the composition has changed very, very slightly, but that's okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is just play around with the order a little bit just to make it easier for editing. So I'm going to move the sky, midground, foreground, sides and foreground center layers into a more logical order for me. So we'll move sky down to the bottom, put the midground kind of in there and the foreground there. Yeah, bring foreground sides to there. Yeah, so we'll have sky at the top, then midground, then the 2 foregrounds. The next thing I'm going to do is start to do some layer masking. So throughout this I'm going to use the Mac keyboard terms. So I will use, for example, Command, and a bit later on I'll use the term Alt. If you're using a PC, substitute Control for Command, and also if you're using a PC, substitute Option for Alt. And yeah, I think that's probably all we need to cover on that one. Just saves me repeating it all the way through. So to get started, we'll put in a layer mask. Actually, I will invert that mask so it's hiding everything. I'll take a white brush so that I can reveal something, make the brush much bigger and brush it in. Oh no, I've got a hard brush, bring the hardness all the way down, and now I can brush in all around there. Yeah, that is good. And then we'll just zoom in a little bit just to check what's happening in there. Yeah, a bit smaller on the brush, brush it all in. Nice detail in the background. Nice tones, the sun's nice and round, not stretched, because it's the short exposure. Okay, so that's my sky done. Now what I'm going to do is bring in the midground the way that I want it. So I'm going to put a layer mask on the midground. Again, I've inverted it, and I'm just going to brush in, just brushing all the way in there with that. Just being a little bit careful around the edges here. I don't have to be too precise. Just brushing it in a bit. Yeah, and that. Okay, that's my midground done. Now it's time to look at the foreground. So on my foreground sides, again, I'm putting in a black layer mask and then just brushing that back in. Now remember, I'd already identified exactly where the sharpest points were on this before I brought it in, so I don't have to worry about checking it too much. I would normally be going in and checking every little bit to make sure that I'd got the sharpest bits, but I didn't actually need to on this. Just zooming in and having a good look at it. Yeah, got it nice and sharp. So that pretty much has covered my long and short exposure blend, my focus stack and my time blend. Pretty easy really. But the job's not finished yet. There's still some more work to be done on this image. So let's get on with that, shall we? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select all of the layers. I'll do Alt-Command E, which creates a duplicate layer with all of the changes already in. And then I'm going to crop it in to get rid of that dead space around the outside. I want it as a 3:2 crop. I want to keep the original aspect ratio. Come on, oh, that's the wrong way around. Let's reverse that. That's it. And then just crop it in just a little bit at the sides. Maybe just a little tiny bit in there. Yeah, that looks good. So that's my crop done. Now it's just a case of tidying up. So what you can see from this image is there's some elements in there that aren't very nice. Now, the temptation is to remove this building over here, which is like a ticket office for the archaeological site. But I tend to not want to do that because it's a permanent structure and I kind of want to keep the scene true to life as much as it's possible to do with what I'm doing here. However, there are some rubbish bins here. They're temporary. They move into different places and sometimes they're not there at all. There's also some blurry people here because there were some people wandered into the scene while I was shooting. So I think it's perfectly okay to take them out of the image. So we'll do that now. So we'll create a duplicate layer. And then just move across here. I'm just going to use the spot removal tool actually, which is good for small stuff, and just take out the bins. Yeah, like that. Then come across here and just remove these blurry people. One was moving a lot more than the other. This won't do a perfect job, but we'll tidy it up in a second. Like that. And this one here. Now just use the clone tool just to be a bit more precise about what I'm blending in here. Like that. Okay. That's those distractions removed. And that means there's only one job left to do. So the final job is just to have a look at the background. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that layer is selected and then zoom in and just have a look at the background. And what you can see here is it's not actually that bad, but some of these buildings are leaning a little bit. It's the wide angle effect. So what I'm going to do is just use a rectangular marquee tool to select an area like that, and then hit Command J, which will duplicate just that area. Then I'm going to do Command T to give me a free transform tool, and then holding down the Command key, which basically allows it to really free transform, I'm just going to drag the scene around a little bit just to straighten things up and make them look squarer. Kind of like that. So it wasn't too bad to start with, but worth just doing a little bit on. Now the temptation might be to do the same sort of thing maybe in the center of the frame, but you have to be careful. If you start straightening things like this little building here, which is the ticket office, it would actually look wrong because it would alter the whole perspective effect. It just looks unnatural. Okay, with that done, I'm going to just pop in a layer mask, take a black brush, quite small. I'm just going to brush in around the edge of the selection area that I've done. And that's just to make sure that I haven't left any sort of hard lines in there from the selection. I don't think I have, but it's just something I like to do to clean it up. And that's pretty much it. So I am going to just go in and flatten the image and then save it out to Lightroom. Now, I always say that once you've finished processing an image, it's a good idea to leave it for a while and then go back and look at it. And that's exactly what I did in this case. And I decided to do one final tweak to this image, which I did in Lightroom. I just thought it could do with a little bit more contrast. So I went into the tone curve and I just applied a medium contrast curve, which I think just made it pop a little bit more. And once again, here is the final image. Okay, that's it. I hope you enjoyed that little tour through some of my processing in Lightroom and Photoshop. If you did, please consider giving it a like, sharing it on social media. Leave me a comment, let me know what you think. And don't forget about the subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. As always, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, so thank you very much. And until the next video, bye.